welcome to another edition of Focus on Hopkins County. This is a very special edition of our program. I'm your host, Tim Thomas, and we're coming to you from Martin Luther King Way here in Madisonville, Kentucky. I want to encourage you to call someone and let them know Focus on Hopkins County is on. I am certainly glad to have with me the Honorable Pastor of the historic Oak Grove Missionary Baptist Church here in Madisonville, the Reverend Robert Cotner, who has been the pastor at Oak Grove now 30 years, celebrating his 30-year anniversary. And we've asked him to come and share with us about the historical part of this part of our community, this beautiful sidewalk that was laid in honor of Dr. King. We want to share it with you. And Reverend Cotton, we're glad you've joined us for Focus on Hopkins County.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. I'm glad to be with you and to be a part of the commemorative services for the late Dr. M.L. King, Jr.
Yes, and we talk about Dr. King and all that he done, and it's going to be reflective in a lot of services during this week, during the weekend of MLK. But we want to talk about the history and tell us kind of about this stretch of area here.
Well, Mr. Thomas, this particular area here as we're standing, which is Martin Luther King Way, has a varied and a very storied history, a history that goes back. Let me state from the outset that this particular street, MLK, on the northernmost part of this street, I lived there at 438 Dickerson Street before it became Martin Luther King Way. So it means much to me, and it has been a part of my upbringing, a part of my childhood as well as my young adulthood as I lived here in the city of Madisonville at the time.
Yeah. When we think about all of that history, and you definitely, this is part of you. When we talk about this area, this is just part of your DNA right here.
That is very much so. I spent many a days coming down this street and in this place that we're now standing. As a boy, as a young man, I had the opportunity to experience, not realizing at the time what this street would become later in my life. And I'm just grateful that God has blessed me to be a part and be able to share some of the historical value of what this street really means to all of the citizenry of Hopkins County.
Yes, and when you think about it, we're right behind the historic Rosenwald School, not too far from what used to be the Branch Street Elementary School, which you attended. So all of this is a rich history here.
Yes, sir, that it very much is. This street that we're now standing, at the time that I was coming up, it was not a street. It only became a street in the year of 1990 when the former mayor, Bill Cox, had formulated a dream of his that he wanted to do something in honor of Dr. King and to do something for the citizenry of Madisonville that would forever stand and that people would emulate and come to know that just how historical Dr. King was, not only Dr. King, but some of the events and some of the places that took place and people who were a part of this movement that we call the historical movement of blacks in the state of Kentucky.
Wow, excellent. And these granite blocks here are chronologically Dr. King's life up until his death.
That is so. Where we're now standing is the granite block that designates and the birth date of Dr. King, which was January the 15th, 1929, born in Atlanta, Georgia. And this was the beginning of the historic life of our late Dr. MLK. Most people view him as a civil rights icon, but he was first and foremost an ordained Baptist minister. He was ordained in February the 25th, 1948. at the Ebenezer Missionary Baptist Church in the city of Atlanta as a Baptist minister, a proponent of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And that is no greater calling that anyone could receive than to be called into the ministry of Christ.
That's absolutely right. And a lot of his sermons, people now even document and still listen to some of his powerful sermons that he preached all over this country and the world. Here we are, June 1948.
Dr. King received his bachelor's degree from Morehouse College as a student of one of the most prestigious colleges in America today for Baptist preachers, not only for Baptist preachers, but for young men of the black heritage who strive to make an imprint on society. If they go down to the house in Atlanta, you'll find that all of them have made names throughout American history as a part of the teachings that are rendered and given to them there at Morehouse. Also, Mr. Thomas, as we're standing here directly behind me, to incorporate some of Madisonville's history, behind me on May Day, when we would have May Day here at the school, when we would have softball games here at Rosenwald and other schools from Providence, Mayfield, Henderson, different places would come in and we would have our May Day activities. This was home plate where all of the home runs that were hit started right here behind us.
Reverend Condon, when you think about the history of Rosenwald and all of those teachers and students, many gone on into glory now, and so just a few left, and to see the historical part of all of this and those that roam this area, it has to be very moving to you.
That it is, because during that time, our teachers as well as those of us who were students, we were all a part of the neighborhood. And the neighborhood, it was a close-knit neighborhood. Directly in front of me was the house of one of the largest black farmers in Hopkins County, Mr. Johnny Martin, who was a farmer by occupation. And he farmed the land and was a great inspiration to many of us young men at that time, young boys at that time, I should say, just to see him and his sons, Travis and Rodney, getting on those old John Deere tractors and going out on West Broadway and other places where he had land that he was farming. And it was an inspiration to know that we as blacks could do whatever we had set our mind out to do. And so it's a blessing, Mr. Thomas, just to share that with you.
Another significant part, October 13th, 1954. Pastor, share with us.
Dr. King's civil rights activities really began. It was after he was called to become the pastor of Dexter Avenue Missionary Baptist Church there in the city of Montgomery, Alabama. Little did he know at the time what God had prepared him for, but his civil rights activities began on this date.
Which started him on a long journey in support of people throughout this nation. Moving right along, December 1st, 1955, an historic date to remember.
This is the date when Miss Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on the bus, and Dr. King's civil rights activities sprung into action. He became the leader of that movement, and from that movement, we progressed and things began to make a change.
Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat. And it's by no coincidence that this particular brick is directly behind, center of the Rosenwald School, right directly behind it. February 18, 1957.
This is when Dr. King has made his formal introduction into American society, whereas everybody in America begins to realize and recognize the name Martin Luther King Jr. He has been given recognized by Time magazine for his prominence in the civil rights movement. And because of that, we find that Dr. King's name has now sprung to life.
1957, and appearing on the front cover of the Time magazine. We come up to September the 9th, 1957.
This is the date where the first Civil Rights Act since Reconstruction was passed by United States Congress in America. Also, to my immediate right, it's a very historical marker. It is no longer here. It has been removed, but my 8th grade teacher, Mr. Perry Hodges, who was married to Miss Opal Arnett at the time, who was a nurse at the Hopkins County Hospital, this was where he lived. And so he was in close proximity to the school, as well as if we acted up, we had to pass by his house, and we had to go by his house to get to school. And so therefore, it is very significant that teachers in that day were a part of the community. So Mr. Hodges lived right here where we're now standing.
There's a step here where the sidewalk, I guess, that led into his house. February the 2nd, 1959, important date.
This is the date where Dr. King went off to India to study the tactics and the philosophies of Dr. Mahatma Gandhi. This is how he learned his nonviolent tactics in order to face the civil unrest that was going on in America, and was also preparing him for things that he would encounter as he made his journey into his calling that God had called him into.
Wow. When we talk about Gandhi, and Gandhi was a man of peace, and I think Dr. King was related to that well.
This is true. Dr. King was nonviolent, and he attributed all of his nonviolence to Dr. Gandhi.
All right, Pastor Connor, January 30th, 1961.
Dr. King's youngest son, Dexter Scott, was born to Dr. and Mrs. King on this particular date, and Mr. Thomas to my immediate left. This was the beginnings of the Mason Funeral Home. It all started right here at this particular house. This particular spot was where the Masons Funeral Home, their history began right here.
Wow. Ernest Mason Sr. Began his business right here on this corner.
Yes, sir.
Still here. Wow. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about April 16, 1963. This sets right in front of the Larry Carney Center. It talks about while jailed for demonstrating in Alabama, King wrote the letter from the Birmingham jail.
And the letter from the Birmingham jail, Mr. Thomas, was that letter that aroused the consciousness of America's preachers. It called them to action, to take an inward look at what was going on in society and to deal with it in front of all of their congregations. And so we find that at that point, that was the turning point in the civil rights movement, when the ministers of the gospel were called to action from the jail cell of Dr. King in Birmingham, Alabama. Directly to my left is what is known now as the Martin Luther King Center, the Carney Center, the Larry Carney Center, on Martin Luther King Way, I should say. This particular building was constructed by the late Mr. Warren Davis. He, as well as people throughout this community, pitched in what little resources they had in order to build a building so that our youth and our children would have some place to go. And it culminated from the fact of the injustice that occurred here in the city of Madisonville when the white students had what was known as the youth center down on Arch Street. They had a place to go. The black and minority students had nowhere to go. And so the black community wanted us to have something. And so it gave us an impetus to do something about our own condition. And because of Mr. Davis and his skills with brick masonry and building, this building was started. And from that point on, that's just one part of the history of the Kearney Center. It was named after one of the young men who was a standout football player for the city of Madisonville and Madisonville North Hopkins. He was also a policeman, and he worked for the state highway department, and he died in a tragic accident out on Nebo Road, the late Larry G. Kearney. And we compliment and we commend those who thought enough to name this building after him, because he was well respected throughout the community by his peers as well as all of the children who looked up to him.
All of this done during the Bill Cox administration. So former Mayor Cox will go down in history as doing a lot, especially with blacks and minorities, in setting up what has now become a historical place here in our community. And Reverend Cotton, when we think about all the history here, the rich history of Madisonville and this significant part of Madisonville, it brings to mind the thought that when you intertwine Dr. King and the history of those that taught at Rosenwald, Caldwell Smith, and so many others, what a blessing it is to know that their legacy still lives on.
This is very true, Mr. Thomas. Also, directly in front of me, there was a little small building that had a small lady by the name of Miss May Sue Wynn. And Miss May Sue Wynn, there was not a child who came up and were born, raised in Madisonville, who did not know Miss May Sue Wynn. Every afternoon when we boys, girls, and all of us alike would come to the playground, Miss Wynn was able to keep us all in check because she loved us and she wanted the best for us. And she would walk from her home over on North Church Street over here every day just to see to it that we as children would have some place to go and to socialize and to recreate ourselves together. And it was all because of her that we are blessed today.
Wow. I can remember Miss Wynn, who was my kindergarten teacher over on Church Street, and how she'd have to make us hold on to a rope, keep us in line. But there were some great days. And I want to recognize my mother, who graduated from Rosenwald, and all of those that really got a lot of history here and learned a lot. Reverend Condon, we have to commend you, not only for all that you do for this community and have done, but for your strong support of civil rights here in Madisonville, Hopkins County. You're a strong proponent of that, and it's because of your efforts that a lot of things have changed throughout this community.
We thank you for that, Mr. Thomas, but it's not because of me. It's because there is a God,
Okay.
and someone has to do it.
Reverend Cotton, thank you for coming and sharing with the people of this region about the rich history that we've shared. And as you go further down, we'll learn more about Dr. King's life, and it finally ends with former Governor Wilkinson, correct?
This is very true. Not only Governor Wilkinson, but on January the 15th, 1990, the former Mayor Bill Cox named this street Martin Luther King Way from Dickerson Street. And then also in March of the same year, former Governor Wallace G. Wilkinson made the third Monday of each January the official Martin Luther King holiday for all Kentuckians.
Wow, and they will be remembered for that. We hope you've enjoyed this program, and we encourage you to continue to follow the legacy of Dr. King. I'm your host, Tim Thomas, and by all means, keep sharing the dream.